Thank you so much, Robert, for the introduction, and SBD team for having me to this very important topic. So, yes, I prepared a few slides. Of course, I'm bringing a cloud perspective, a cloud services company perspective. So that's why, in my opinion, the automotive flywheel runs on tokens, and I'll explain what does it mean. If you go to the next slide, please. I really like this blog post from my friend Agustin Friedel on LinkedIn, right? So he's talking about the squeeze the automotive OEM are into, and I think it's very related to the topic. What's this squeeze? You see there's money that is done by cloud platforms and application at the very top, and there's money done by, let's say, semiconductors, electronic players combined, right? What's in the middle, right? So, and especially who owns the middle layer in this? Who is making money out of it? The middle layer, just to be sure, and it's very important in order to enable that kind of monetization for agentic system. There's a missing dimension, in my opinion, in Agustin analysis. That is the integration difficulty. I'll come back to this because I think it's a key enabler to enable really these revenues coming from agentic application to automotive and mobility. I think we can distinguish content into sides. Surface content, as I call it, at the very top of this cloud services application diagram, where there's a API level, a high-level APIs already available, can ship today, like music, video, gaming, podcast, recommendation, geolocalized advertising, all this kind of thing. This is relatively easy to integrate. But there's deep content as well. That's ECU data, vehicle network data, OEM owned data that typically is in silos, a system outside the car. This is still very difficult to monetize to the supply chain and monetize in general because let's say it's very locked in. So we need to be aware that agentic and AI, and that's why we talk about AI-defined vehicle, are following an SDV, a software-defined vehicle, kind of implementation. And that transition is not yet completed by all OEMs. And by the way, this is reflected in your diagram, putting the Chinese OEM first, where the SDV transition has been implemented more effectively than the rest. To do that, still electronic consolidation, virtualization, platform engineering are exercises that are the precondition to implement a proper agentic system that operates with full power inside the organization. And that's why, again, business case typically doesn't break at the idea layer. Many ideas, we talk about many ideas in OEMs and customers, but it breaks the integration layer, especially across the supply chain. If you go to the next slide. So it's not just problems. I think that the agents, in fact, are a big opportunity to solve this. IoT, if you remember this term, we discussed about connected car in the IoT perspective, connect your car, home devices, digital life, never happened, right? So that's the hard reality. Agents, we see a real potential to be that ultimate abstraction layer, acting really as a connective tissue between the cloud, the vehicle, user context, and other environments. There's a lot of value in there, right? So in trying really to put all this context at the service of a user, at the service of an organization. And in this context, when we talk about agents, I loved a Jensen keynote at the recent NVIDIA GTC. Tokens are the unit of that new agentic intelligence layer. And holistically speaking, in two sides, there are tokens that are consumed to generate revenues from end users. For example, hyper-personalized experiences. Think about the case like, hey, I noticed that you seem a little bit congested. Do you want me to turn the temperature up a notch here in the car and at home, right? So this syncs and pulls data from every single source. Or in cost reduction, if you can go back to the previous slide, I think it's just moved too fast. And to really produce engineering efficiency. So, and this is a huge low-hanging fruit in the automation of what I call the engineering and the software development lifecycle automation. This is really the immediate value that can be generated by this. And code generation, I think it's a side effect for automotive, by the way. You see in my diagram that these tokens needs to be consumed by what? By agents. It's super important to have open standard way to build these agents and solid ways to productize them. Open standards in our terminology is a strengths agents, an open source way to create these agents, an agent core, a way to deploy them safely in cloud ready for production. These are in a big loop context, right? So they act as a feature, but they act as a support as well for software engineering, for product engineering in general. That's what's represented in this diagram down here. If you go to the next slide, all of this is really necessary to implement what in Amazon we always define the flywheel. Token consumed, cost reduced, features that are developed with higher pace, revenue generated through experiences, subscription, or ads, geolocalized ads, more data, better models, better experiences, more engagement, more data. This is a flywheel that needs to be generated. And it's very, very evident that who owns the agentic control plane will own the cockpit and this kind of experience in 2035. This is super important because we have some very solid early signals, first of all, presented by the companies that are here in this panel that are offering already services and revenue opportunity for the customers. But even for our experiences with customer through the demos, for example, the one we presented at CES with Alexa Custom Assistant, with Alexa Plus, and 3 strengths agent that were able to talk with the car, talk with the service agent, talk at a different level in order to provide the next level kind of service. And as well, customers that are reducing feature development, I'm not joking, from weeks to days, thanks to, for example, Kiro, our agentic IDE, right? And I never saw an activation like these days. All the customers are talking about this revolution coming in, and they are willing to engage on this revolution at a very cultural level. So a big message that I have, I think it's really experiment. This is the time for experimentation because the window is open. It's a fast transition. So it's really important to get to work very, very, very quickly on this. With a caveat, agentic introduced a new level of threat. You recently probably saw Cloud Mythos that has been, let's say, announced in private betas because it's so powerful that can easily exploit cybersecurity or create new cybersecurity risks. So it's very important to consider AI just not anymore as a tool, but a proper actor with trust, governance, and guardrail, both in production as well as a product feature. So that's the content I prepared for this first phase, and I'm more than happy to go deeper in any of that with the Q&A and the panel interaction. Thank you.